Hold your fire! I'm a human!
For those of you that know me, I'm a big fan of Final Fantasy IV, or Final Fantasy II as we know here in the USA. There have been many different versions ported and remade over the years, whether it be on the Nintendo DS, the Game Boy Advance, PSP, recently the Pixel Remaster, and a few others, but the only version that I ever really played was the original Final Fantasy II release that we got here in the United States. As I continue on through the Final Fantasy series through 10 here on my channel, I decided that I wanted to play a more faithful version of Final Fantasy IV than the one that I had previously covered on my channel. I did some research and ultimately I decided to go with the Final Fantasy IV Namingway SNES Edition hack. And I'd be remiss if I didn't briefly go over the changes made to this edition. Final Fantasy IV Namingway Edition was an attempt to bring Final Fantasy II USA closer to its Japanese 4 counterpart. The changes in this hack include the following: using modern names where possible, abbreviations where necessary, all items, spells, commands, jobs, and monsters have been renamed, stats of enemies and bosses have been changed to their original form along with spell learning rates, many of the graphics have been overhauled, such as the treasure chests, save points, and maps are restored to their original form, including the developer's room, which I did not find in my playthrough. The biggest changes, however, are that of the script, which was heavily reworked to be more modernized. There was the addition of the dash button utilizing the B button on the controller, the ability to skip a character's position in battle, and I found that overall, due to not only the stat changes, but the bosses seem much more aggressive than what I would dub vanilla Final Fantasy II SNES. As such, the game provides more challenge on the retail version. I'm sure there's a few other minor changes made, but those are the most glaring and documented. Final Fantasy IV follows along with the quest of Cecil, who starts out as a Dark Knight, as he's trying to prevent the evil Golbez from taking all the familiar staples of the Final Fantasy series, the crystals, and destroying the world. It's a rather simple premise that's fleshed out with tons of subplots, lots of characters and arcs, and numerous planes to traverse to stop the evil, such as the overworld, underworld, and even the moon. Final Fantasy IV jumps out to me as having a very well done story, especially considering its initial release on the Super Famicom in 1991. Nothing overstays its welcome. I find the pacing to be very good, albeit maybe sometimes a bit quick in certain areas, and there are many moments where you feel the emotion and cathartic shifts. Stories of love, betrayal, tragedy, and triumph. It really has it all. If you're playing for the first time, I sincerely hope you enjoy, and if you're a veteran, I hope you're able to relive the experience once again. It goes without saying that Final Fantasy IV, again considering the time of release, which was very early in the Super Famicom or SNES lifespan, has very clean, crisp, and well done graphics. There is a considerable leap from that of Final Fantasy III on the Famicom, and it's most noticeable in enemy and boss sprites, the differing realms in which you explore, Mode 7, and some specific areas such as the Tower of Babel and the moon as a whole, and the underworld. As you could probably expect, composer Nobuo Uematsu kills it as always. Final Fantasy IV has quite possibly the best rendition of the opening track Prelude, along with other bangers such as the battle theme, the flying theme, Edward's harp theme, and atmospheric romps that litter the entirety of the moon and the underworld. Final Fantasy IV is low-key one of the best soundtracks in the entire series, even if it sometimes gets brushed over for other entries. Now for the gameplay, where we're going to combine some base level stuff along with that of which came with the Namingway hack. Obviously, Final Fantasy IV is a traditional turn-based, random encounter style JRPG. As such, much of the gameplay revolves around world, town, and dungeon exploration, piloting various vehicles and crafts, defeating enemies, and backtracking where necessary. The biggest change between Final Fantasy IV and its counterparts comes with the battling. This is the introduction of Active Time Battle, or ATB, to the series, which means the characters and enemies are now battling it out in real time. This lends itself to more strategy and fast twitch reflexes in order to be successful. Now for the Namingway parts. The addition of the dash button is a godsend. Obviously, prior to playing this, I'd already beaten Final Fantasy II USA version about twice maybe in the last 6 or so years, but I could tell you that the dash button cuts down on so much extraneous time loss. Look, I'm obviously a fan of old games, old RPGs and grinds, believe me, but the dash button really revitalized the game for me in many ways. I think it's perfect for not only a newcomer, but especially for those that have already experienced the vanilla version of the game. I would say it probably saved me about 2 to 3 hours at least on my total gameplay time. Another minor but great gameplay change with this hack is the ability to skip a character in battle via the X button. And you could also press select to toggle between your HP and ATB percentage. Now, I didn't really use the latter, but the former I found myself using a decent amount throughout my playthrough, namely with healers or spellcasters that I didn't really need or want to waste MP on a specific turn or battle. But perhaps the biggest gameplay change for me compared to vanilla is that it's now challenging. Sure, in vanilla at times it can be challenging, especially if you're underleveled. However, with the Namingway hack, if you don't have a good strategy, fast fingers, and proper leveling, you're gonna have a bad time on most bosses. I can't tell for certain complete specifics, but what my eyes showed me are that the bosses are stronger, as noted in the readme file, but they also seem to be much faster. So much so that some bosses would literally wipe me out if I made one wrong move. I'm not even kidding. But if you aren't a fan of difficulty, don't fret. Leveling and some trial and error will get you through even the darkest of times. There are also so many minor things that have changed in this hack that it would be almost impossible for me to name them all. So like I said, I'll link the hack in the description below, and the package does come with a readme file that goes over everything if you want complete details. But before we wrap up, I would be remiss if I did not mention the fact that they restored and added many adult situations, such as strippers, risque dialogue, and even what appeared to be a porno mag item that's useless. I don't know, was that in the original game? I don't really know, but either way, it's pretty funny. Final Fantasy IV Namingway Edition is, to me, the ultimate form of Final Fantasy IV on the SNES. While maintaining the original game's integrity, we are delivered a more intended experience by the way of this hack. Quality of life changes, more adult and relatable dialogue, tons of minor changes in the way of graphics, names, etc. to keep a veteran of the original on your toes and constantly going, "Oh, that's what that is?" or "What's this?" It really keeps things fresh. So whether you're a veteran or a newcomer, I couldn't recommend this hack enough. As such, I give Final Fantasy IV Namingway Edition a 9 out of 10. My only gripes with the game in general these days are at times it can be a bit difficulty spiky, some of the characters simply aren't usable for long enough, in certain segments if you die in battle, getting back to said battle could be a snooze fest. Other than that though, again, considering that this game came out in 1981, it's still amazing. The SNES in general killed it with launch and early wave titles, and Final Fantasy IV is no exception. If you've enjoyed this review, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already, and check out my playthrough in the description or pinned comments below. Until next time.